Welcome to the Wonder Woman Club podcast. We bring you conversations that will inspire, empower, and educate you to thrive both in business and in life. My name is Vash Naidu, and I'm your host, an intuitive fempreneur coach and the founder of the Wonder Woman Club, a global community of phenomenal women doing phenomenal things in the world. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wonder Woman Club podcast. Today, we have a very exciting guest, Ram Castillo, who is a multitude of many things. Firstly, a designer, an advisor, and a business coach, as well as an author. And he has his very own podcast called Giant Thinkers. Welcome to the podcast, Ram. We are so excited to have you here. And I would love for you to tell me your story. Where did it all start for you?
Oh, Vash, what a pleasure it is to be on your show. We met on Clubhouse, and it's amazing to connect with you and your audience. So my story, I'd say, begins before me. It starts definitely with my parents, who are originally from the Philippines. Growing up for them, it was tough. I mean, we're talking about, let's start with my dad. He was is one of 11 children. So big family. His father passed away when he was 3 years old. So already he had to grow up quite quickly. And then his mother passed away when he was in uni. So, 18, 19. And so he really had to look at education as a way out, so to speak, of a life that was tough and still is. We're talking about Philippines being 100 million people with a landmass that's 1/3 of Australia. I'm from Sydney, and we have 25 million people. So Philippines is 4 times as many people with 3 times less space than Australia. So totally different lifestyle. He studied marine transportation, mechanical engineering, double degree. And get this, we get to Australia, migrate here, and both of those degrees are not recognized, even though that they studied at a top university. Mum, on the other hand, she as well, tough, one of 5. Her life was full of sickness. She was just a sickly child and just was constantly sick. She had a lot of health problems, and she pushed through. Her father was not really around. My grandfather, he was in the military, and basically he was fairly abusive. He just wasn't really around, and he was a bit of a drunk and a womanizer. And basically my mum grew up with sort of her mum taking care of 5 kids on her own. So my grandma, she was a real hustler. She had a little corner store, and she had a little sewing machine, and she would make do and sent all the kids to school and everything. And that was the lens with which I grew up in, because I was only a 1-year-old baby when we migrated to Sydney. So here I am, one of 3 kids. I was always a very curious kid. I remember one time in our little apartment, Mum was cooking spaghetti, and I would collect empty tissue boxes and toilet paper rolls, and I would make stuff. I would make robots with these cardboard material and make cities, whole thing. I would even draw on the wall. Mum would let me, as long as I could clean it up. She was cooking spaghetti one night. I was about 4, and she said, "Ram, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I don't know, Mum. I just want to make stuff." She stopped cooking and put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, "Whatever you want to be, whatever you want to do, make sure you dream big, like real big, and dream bigger, much, much bigger." And so imagine growing up that way, where you're not prescribed a certain path. So I grew up with parents who just encouraged me to try everything. I wasn't great at basketball, wasn't great at soccer, even though I played soccer for most of my life. It was just a go for it. Like literally nothing to lose. Go for it. Because they didn't have the fertile ground that I have, that they obviously saw by migrating here. So I went for it, Vash. I went for everything. We didn't have much, but I navigated through. Creativity was the thing that was my zone of genius, the thing that I gravitated towards. Not that I knew that it was at the time. It's just that I only knew that I was good at it because I just naturally was always a drawer, and I would paint and I would play and I would explore. But who knew that that was a huge part of being a designer? You know, a part of not assuming and iterating something and reverse engineering a desired outcome and finding a solution to a problem. Like it's a puzzle, and I loved it. Life is a puzzle for me, and so I apply that to business. I apply that to a whole range of things, but fundamentally, and I'll park it there. But that's a big part of where my story starts.
I think that's, like when I meet people that have had very different childhoods, and where you have every opportunity and very low opportunities or no opportunity at all, it changes the quality of the person so dynamically in their characteristics and in their outlook in life. And I think I also come from Africa. I know what challenge is like, and I've also had a very tough childhood in that sense. And I think you've had parents that instilled in you this dream big mentality, which you don't normally get. Like you said, a lot of parents, especially if they've come from that type of background, can easily say, well, we want you to study, we want you to do this and go into this. But you were given, total free reign in your own life, which is so majestic as a kid, and to see that grow. And what I want to ask is, how do you see the dynamics between, obviously growing up, you grew up mainly in Australia, but your parents grew up in a very different world altogether. And what is that difference like with the generation between you and your parents now, and how you communicate and how you dream and what you go after, as opposed to what they feel that, is acceptable in their lives, because they would have also just taken what was given at one point in their life, right?
Yeah, I think we've all had to adjust, and I guess it's I've been Aussified, and I think they've been Aussified, so to speak, as well, because there's cultural shifts here we're talking about, and I guess I didn't realize all of this until I was 15, when I first visited the Philippines for the first time. I'll tell you this story, which I think you'll find amusing. Landed in Manila Airport, 15 years old, decked out in my Quicksilver and Billabong gear, right? Like, because I was an Aussie kid. Like, I didn't grow up the way my parents did, right? I only heard stories. Get to the airport, and grandma's with us on my mum's side, mum's mum. And she said, hey, Ram, when you, and by the way, this is in all Tagalog. Tagalog is the Filipino language. There is another dialect, but Tagalog is the common one. And so they would speak to me, actually. So that's one. They would speak to me in Tagalog growing up, and I would respond in English. Now, this is quite common for others that migrate out of their main sort of country of origin. So grandma said to me, which we call Lola, Lola. She said, don't give any money to the beggars, okay, the poor people, because there's lots of them. And if you give money to one, it just can create a bit of chaos. And I was like, oh yeah, no worries. Of course, that's fair point. But in my mind, I thought beggars were like what I saw in Australia, which were sort of like bearded men with cardboard signs, right? So that's what I thought. Get to the airport, and then was greeted by a few little kids who made these handmade necklaces out of flowers. It was just a flower necklace. And I was like, wow, this is kind of like Hawaii, like what I would see in movies or whatever. Anyway, so I gave 20 pesos to this kid, and then within seconds it was a rush of all these other kids, and they were the poor people my grandma was saying. In fact, there were so many of them I couldn't keep up. We rushed to the van. I had a designated driver that my auntie organized, and closed the door. And then my grandma was like, I told you not to give any money to the beggars. And I was like, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And so it hit me like straight away. And I'm looking outside the window of our van, and we're driving off, and they're like literally banging on the van, going, begging, literally begging at that point. There was even like, other people, selling candy or lollies or whatever they could, knocking on vans when you'd stop at a traffic light or somewhere. Without any limbs. And it's like the whole thing was just an eye-opening experience for me, because in the back of my head I thought, I could have been any one of these kids. This could have been my life. Now, I mean, nothing compares to that. If you live a life in Australia, you can work in McDonald's or a night packer at Woolworths at the grocery store, and you still are able to travel the world. You can live a good life, and it is a very comfortable lifestyle just because you live in a country that offers you the opportunity to have that starting point. Now, granted, there's poverty here in Australia too, 100%. But for me, that was a key shift. And you asked me the question around, what differences might there have been? I mean, there's so many cultural ones. Just like, I guess I've found that it was difficult for them to adjust as well, because the community of being a Filipino is very rich in, like, everyone's your auntie, your uncle. It's like, honestly, and that this is no exaggeration. When my dad visited a few years back, like I said, one of 11, my auntie had to hire a whole estate just to bring a family reunion together. It was only partial, but there was 120 people that turned up. It was magical. It was brilliant. And I guess that's a big part of it. I mean, there is a loneliness that I see when people migrate out of what they're used to, because they don't have much, Vash. They don't have much, over there in the Philippines for the most part. But it is so rich in happiness. So that is deeply ingrained in me. Because also, one thing I didn't mention, I was severely bullied as a child in primary school. I broke my arm 3 times and got 16 stitches before the age of 11. And if it wasn't for the love and the nurturing of my family, my mum and my dad, I think I'd be a different person. Because even despite that fact, I felt loved and I felt cared for, and I was I wasn't confident. So people look at me now and they're like, Ram, you've spoken around the world. You've done, I've launched 2 books. I've done 2 global tours, speaking around the world on design and creativity, and I've been on big stages. But that's what I want to show people as possible. I wasn't naturally gifted by any means. I worked hard to get to where I am. To a lot of the success that we see in public, we don't see that those people have spent years practicing their craft in private. And I hope to be an example of what's possible, because I tell you now that, I was the shortest kid in school, Vash, second shortest in high school, never the most talented, like I just said, with sporting. I was chosen C grade, D grade even. I was never the most wealthy, never the most intelligent, always in the friend zone, honestly. And I was a very shy kid. And so it's possible to learn a lot of the things that I feel might be unreachable to so many.
Yeah. There's so much that you've touched on there. And I think, the experience of you going back home, I mean, I know what it's like. I'm a first generation expat to the UK, and I know what that challenge is like, because it does get lonely, and it is quite a difficult, it's a difficult process, especially when you're going through difficulty yourself, not having your family, your support, your network around you. And for me, I am the only one that has left my family that is in another country. So it's quite challenging in that sense. But, when I go back home, I obviously still have a very deep affinity to the country, because I spent most of my life in the country. But with you going back to the Philippines and having that experience, how did that then shape your mentality after that? Because prior to that, being a kid, I can imagine being a kid in Australia, like exposed to everything that is available to you, and then seeing how difficult it is. What did that make you think at that point, and how did that shape you to become the man you are right now? Because I think that would have been quite a pivotal moment.
It was, and you've picked it, Vash. You've picked it well. That was 15, that first visit, and then recurring year on year. We would visit every 2 years. I would visit. Highly recommend it, by the way, for any parents, obviously, when safe to do so. Just traveling as a whole. In short, it expanded my baseline. So when you're a kid growing up, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know the perspective because, sorry, let me rephrase that. There's a difference between a lived experience and an observed experience. And I often speak about this on Clubhouse, actually. It's important, and it's important to know that we have to bring in the voices of the lived experience, because observation is so important, and certainly a tool with which we can appreciate something. But until you're there, and even then, even when I was there, I was still observing. So I guess for me, it's really asking the question, and I ask myself the question constantly, where is this vantage point that you're viewing life and this opportunity or this challenge even? So I'll give you an example, right? My parents couldn't afford to take me to design school. I knew at that age, around 15, 16, I wanted to pursue design without a doubt. There was no question. It was the only commercialized career path that was available when you're advised with your career advisor and whatnot. That was clear as day. I'm going for it. Problem is, I couldn't afford to go there. And in fact, I wasn't really great on the books. I mean, I was an average student, took general maths, general English. Like, I was not excelling in anything apart from art. But art alone, problem with the education system to some degree, art alone might not have given me the grades to go to university. And so I was not expecting to go to university. Long and the short of it is, there was one design school that I really wanted to go to, and it was a private design college, best in the country. The only problem was, and at the time it was a lot, it was about 50 grand. Now that same course is over 100 grand. My parents couldn't afford even a fraction of that. So I applied for scholarships on every design school that offered design. I didn't get into that school. Okay. It was called Billy Blue College of Design under Laureate University. And I went to some design school that offered me a scholarship to study design that doesn't even know about it. I mean, it wasn't even known, rather, that it was known for design. In fact, it's basically a no frills branded college that is known for IT and marketing, but not design. Anyway, I took it because it was that was my only way to study it. After that, I got an offer to start at Ogilvy, right? But in the mailroom. And so everyone thought, why the heck you're so talented, Ram? They were like, you're so much better than the mailroom job. And in my head, I'm like, and this is one example. And I'm like, this is the best opportunity that I could ever get. But people didn't see it the way I saw it. How could they? They didn't have the lived experience I had. I thought, this is great. I saw so many pros to this. I was like, 350 people in the first week is who I met over 4 levels. They had the biggest accounts in the world. Everything from Pizza Hut to Coke to Hyundai to AMEX to Dove. Long list, client list. I get to be a fly on the wall. People thought that was a bad thing. I was exposed to everything. I could get everyone's name and they would know mine. There were so many good things about this. But again, a lot of my peers and even others, even my teachers in college were like, you sure you want to take that job? And I'm like, this is great. And sure enough, it was the springboard to launch my entire career. People that I met there are people that have allowed me to help to navigate to where I am. So I went through the ranks. I went through McCann World Group, another big agency, Imagination, worked with Kylie Minogue on New Year's Eve branding, 2012. I worked with great clients all the way through, and I climbed that ladder. I did what seemingly was impossible. My former role, Vash, for the listeners, I was head of digital design at Saatchi and Saatchi in Australia. And so I was servicing AMEX, Qantas, and Toyota as clients. I had a team of 8 to 12 people. Previously, I was a design director at DDB. So I was servicing McDonald's, Woolworths, and Audi. But, I started in the mailroom. In fact, my first ever real job was a Woolworths checkout operator at 14.9 months. When you're in Australia, you can work 14.9 months on the dot. I got a job. So, I guess for me, how it did that affect me is we have it so good and I'm willing to play the long game. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I believe that it's given me resilience that I see that are lacking in today, and to no fault of their own most of the time. It's the world we live in, the tools, the exposure, people, places, things. They impact the way that we have resilience this much or resilience that much. The instant gratification. Is it this much, or is it like, no, I'm willing to wait? And so for me, it's allowed me great patience because I'm so grateful that the alternative could have been far different. So that's a bit of my thoughts on it.
I think, there's this learned, like I want to go back to when you said about the learned and observed experience, because I find I gravitate to people who have had the lived experience, because I've had a lot of lived experiences. And I can tell the difference from someone who has had the lived and observed experience, because the depth of the person is very different. And in, and switching it slightly into more of the world of business, right? The world of academia, the world of career, with people that are listening that are just starting out, right? And you potentially have, if you're listening to a podcast, you might be someone who has every opportunity and every gift and every option because you'll be listening to a podcast right now. And the thing is that you might not have had those lived experiences, and you get to observe, or you get to learn and listen to others who've had really challenging, difficult moments. It's from your perspective, what is the best way for someone to become adapted in the way of having almost lived that experience, but having the characteristics instilled in them from the other lived experiences of others, so that they can become better beings and also climb that ladder? Because we live in such an age right now where everything is fast, everything is digital. We want things immediately, and we look at the Gen Z generation, the millennial generation, and everything's expected really quick. And you talk about playing the long game, and when you play the long game, as you're playing that long game, you will get the experience. But for the generation now that wants everything right now, wants everything quick, how do they instill that level of knowledge and wisdom within themselves to become better? Because I'm still doing it, I think we're all still doing it, but how do we help that generation right now?
So I recently did a talk at Tennis New South Wales, part of Tennis Australia. I did a talk at their Future Leaders program. So a group of 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. And it was about leadership. And I think this is so closely tied to approaching the openness and exploration and the appetite to shift and challenge what's comfortable effectively. So the answer that I would give is around this notion, which is, I believe that everyone can be a change maker, a leader, an ambassador for inclusivity and diversity, and be someone that is unplugged from the matrix, so to speak, as in, not including so much of our own bias, unconscious or not. How is the question? Well, know that it has a price. And I say that softly, but I mean it so very powerfully. There is always a price to pay. And this is where the penny dropped for me, as I'd lived a life where I look back, and beauty of hindsight, right? And I'm sure there'll be many more. But there's a price to be paid. And I'm not talking about financial or any means. In fact, I'm talking about, and you can see where I'm going with this probably if you're listening, it's the price of voluntary discomfort, to the point of letting go of your ego, and it's hard by all means. I'm not saying this as an easy thing, but letting go of so much, letting go of what you think you know about someone or people or something, because we never really know. And so that's confronting, because you actually have to challenge your own thinking and beliefs. This is what I had to do. I mean, even now, my parents did the best they could. I'll loop it back to them. Even, my dad lawn mows to relax, Vash, because he doesn't see the value in it. He would rather do it himself.
Yeah.
And he means well, and he's done the best he could. But in my mind, I'm like, Dad, let's just pay someone to do that. And he's in his right mind, no way that's even a conceivable notion. But this is the thing. What is the thinking and beliefs that have led you to behave the way you've been behaving? So if you find something in yourself, because it's like this, it's right. It's like if there's an issue of the world or a problem that you feel can be solved or something, we all want to contribute in some way, shape or form, make the world better in anything. But there's two options. You either try to fix the thing or we have to change us. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're really talking about, the lived versus observed. The issue is nothing's going to change unless there's a willingness. That's why I always start any of my coaching with, what are you looking to achieve? How do we know when you've achieved it? What are we agreeing on moving forward? And what is your level of commitment and willingness to explore? That, no matter how many mentors, because here it is, we can get mentors, we can get coaches, we can read books, we can be in environments that lift us up and that expand our perception and awareness of viewpoints that we are not simply exposed to in the local community or the neighborhood or the family that we've been exposed to. We can gather, but if there's no willingness, and that has to come from within. So that would be my thoughts on it.
That totally speaks to me in so many levels. I think, when we talk about this willingness, I think before that willingness is that step of actually becoming clear about who you actually are, seeing yourself as you are with all your flaws, warts and everything, and seeing that and having that total awareness. Because I think without that, we don't recognize that there's something in us that needs to change. There's something in us that needs to, heal, repair, rebuild, rediscover, reprogram something. And we all have that. And it's going to consistently be that way because that's how we are as humans. And, when you talk about that willingness, I think it is a choice, right? Everything we have in this world is a choice. And I think that's the challenge we have in the current state of where everything is right now, because people are making choices that are selfish and not united as a country, as a community, as a family, as a people, as humanity. That breaks us down, when we make those choices. So totally get that on such a deep level.
I mean, I appreciate that, Vash. I mean, one thing that we can utilize as a tool is, well, two things. One is asking better questions within ourselves and what might arise from that. And number two is when we reflect on something like, what are the moments with which I've felt uncomfortable? We have to stay in that discomfort for another 20%. For example, I'm going through a massive overhaul of hiring more designers for one of the companies that I'm a part of. And it's amazing what comes out when you just add a little bit of pressure. Tony Robbins says this so well. It's like, for example, with money, he said that money isn't evil. It's an amplifier for who you really are. Mm-hmm. I think that applies for a lot of things. When what does pressure do to someone? It really does show someone's true colors. So I'm big on, just seeing how you act and behave in circumstances that are challenging, and then reflect. If you're listening to this and you might go, okay, how might I change my views on being more inclusive? And if you think you're inclusive, think again. because there's always bias. You know, I love when we talk about culture as well, when we talk about all of the this is really about culture in many ways. Culture, by one of my mentors, has been defined by the worst behavior tolerated. I love that description. Wow. Yeah. It's powerful stuff we're talking about here, about, how we are in the world, how we exist, the point of view, and it really, that's why I love this show of yours. It really dives into the story, because the story, it hasn't ended yet if you're listening to this, and the story has different endings as well. So yeah.
I love that description of culture. Culture is the worst behavior tolerated. I think that is so powerful and so true. That's definitely blown me away, because I've never thought of it in that way, and I just love that, because I've always described culture in so many different ways, but that just sums it up for me in complete truth. That is powerful. So thank you for sharing. I want to touch on the fact, I know that you coach and you work with people, and I want you to showcase for me and for those that are listening, what is the best tips and techniques that you can show someone in how to cultivate that sense of awareness and that sense of willingness and that sense of adaptability and flexibility to grow? Because we know how uncomfortable it can be. We know how discomforting it is. But it's very easy as well to give up and go back to what we know is our comfort and which is secure, which is what is natural to us. So what is your best advice and tips for people to get through that, push through that difficult time?
Well, the first thing that I would say, and it's a very great question, let me articulate this back to you, Vash, and for the listeners. How do you cultivate a willingness to grow? Right? Just in summary there. How to cultivate willingness is the short snippet of that. The first thing we need to do is we need to define, what does the future state look like? Otherwise, there is nothing that will help navigate you towards a change. It's like when I speak to organizations about culture shifts and change making, and I'm like, have you identified the exact change that you want to occur? Then you build the capability around that. Then you build a roadmap around that. Then we define and prioritize the action steps for each milestone, right? It sounds pretty simple on paper, but I think when we talk about cultivating a willingness now, we need to apply the willingness to something, is my point. So I often find that that people are not in a shortage of goals. We want a lot. The problem is that we haven't curated the criteria of our decision making. So even with willingness, to cultivate a willingness, it goes back to something that I said to one of my friends recently. Actually, I interviewed Stephanie Rice, for example, on my podcast, and she's a 3-time gold medalist, 5-time world record holder. And she said, anyone can do what I've done. And I'm like, Steph, what are you talking about? She said, anyone can be a 3-time gold medalist, 5-time world record holder. And I'm like, yeah, how? She said, all you need to do is you need to train 7 days a week, 7 hours a day for 15 years, and you can have what I've had. So when we talk about willingness, we're not willing to do that. Fair few are willing to do that. So you have to ask yourself, what does my future state of my career, my personal life, my relationships, the way that my version of impact? I mean, needless to say, I'm not going to say, gun to your head, how would you live differently? Because that's just unrealistic. Yes, we can talk about sliding doors moments, but we're not talking about we're not talking about the instances where it's like that black and white. Because we simply can't comprehend that version of change making. The trigger, actually, for me, that's practical, has to be get a piece of paper and sit there and literally bucket in 3 buckets: personal goals, professional goals, and physical or health and wellness goals, and go down a pragmatic approach, 3 month, 12 month, 3 years, and go, what do I want? And heck, pull out that SMART frameworks, specific, measurable, attainable, relatable, time bound. Yes, it works. So this is now, yeah, sure, we're getting into a bit of coaching sort of methodologies, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you're not doing. So try it and really commit to it. The problem is we don't try it. We've heard of it. I've just given an exercise. I'll be surprised if even 20% of people do what I've just said.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, when the desire for something better, or the desire to raise our standard of life to where we are right now is greater than the level of comfort that we feel in this moment.
Spot on.
That will change that completely. So yeah, I love the 3 buckets because it's so simple. Grab a piece of paper, even on your mobile, we're all on our mobiles all the time. You can do it then. And just map it out, because the more you can start to visualize, the more you can start to see that life. You're like, well, yeah, that's what I truly want. So if you want something, you've got to do something to get it. And that's just the basis of life, right? That's just like a normal universal law. In order to get something, you've got to do something. So I love that. And this has been, an amazing interview. And I'm going to close off with our final question, which is, for me, I'd like to know what you would want people to think about you or say about you after you pass into the next life. This is a big one. So yeah, what would you want people to say or think about you?
Kind of close my eyes for this one a bit. Look, I would want people to have associated that I lived a life leading with generosity, following with care, and going down my own truth barrel, batting for the fences every single moment of every single day, and making impact through that generosity, love, and care. That's it.
That's amazing and very beautiful. I think in so many ways, all of us want people to say nice things about us. And I think sometimes we don't realize that it can be the smallest of things that we do today that will allow people to say those good things. It's not always the big thing that we think we need to do like in 10, 20 years time. It could just be helping your neighbor today, doing something nice for someone you love, someone you care for. And it's really simple. So thank you for a wonderful interview. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. And I look forward to having you back again. I think we can talk about a lot of topics, I think. So it's been amazing.
You've been great. Thank you, Vash.
You're welcome. And it's such a pleasure having you, and we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Ram.
Likewise. Thank you so much.